All right, YouTube. This Detroit's HPTV coming to you out of Detroit. Back at you with another video. I want to talk to you guys today about Biden's giving the commencement speech at Morehouse. Now, they're saying there's a lot of protests and pushback about Biden giving this speech at Morehouse because of what's going on in Palestine. So you know that Morehouse is a historical black college for black men. The black men is there, and a lot of them are in an uproar about what's going on in Palestine. Now, to me, we're going to talk about what Biden has done as it relates to the black community. It seems like they will be in an outrage that Biden was a devout segregationist, friends with Strom Thurmond and other KKK members. It seems to me that they would be upset that Biden also created the crime bill and called them super predators. It seems to me that they would also be upset that he said that if they went to school with white children, it would turn their communities into racial jungles. It seemed to me that they would be upset that Biden said, if you don't vote for me, you ain't black. It seems to me that they would be upset that every promise that he made to black people as they carry water for the Democratic Party, he violated. It seems to me that they would be upset that he's opened the border and is overrunning their communities with immigrants that he's giving more benefits than them and veterans. I think these students are misguided at the real reason they should be protesting Biden coming to give a speech at Morehouse. Now, everything I just said, you can just go on YouTube and Google and see Biden saying these things out of his own mouth. But I want you to see the reason these black students consider themselves protesting and outraged about Biden coming in light of what I've just told you. This is for fair use under the 1976 Copyright Act for educational purposes and commentary and the First Amendment. Look at why they're mad.
So concerned with the potential for protest over Biden's handling of the war in Gaza that they sent the head of the White House Office of Public Engagement to meet with a group of students and faculty a week before the speech. Now, here's a glimpse of that meeting where a Morehouse student expressed his concerns.
Right now, I'm being told that we need to use our platform as Morehouse men. Why are we using it to support someone who hasn't been supporting Palestine and Gaza and things like that? How are we being global cosmopolitan citizens?
Why are you using it to support a man who referred to you as super predators and incarcerated your uncles and fathers with draconian laws that kept them in prison for nonviolent crimes for years? He said he wanted to bring you super predators to heal. Maybe that's why you guys shouldn't be supporting Biden.
What president does that say?
Still, the New York Times has insisted anti-war protests haven't happened at Morehouse. The Times published an article recently titled, "Why Anti-War Protests Haven't Flared Up at Black Colleges Like Morehouse," and wrote, quote, "The reasons stem from political, cultural, and socioeconomic differences with other institutions of higher learning. While HBCUs host a range of political views, domestic concerns tend to outweigh foreign policy in the minds of most students. Many started lower on the economic ladder and are more intently focused on their education and their job prospects after graduation." Now we have host of the Savvy Sads podcast, Sabrina Salvati, here with us today to talk about why she disagrees with the New York Times' take. She joins us now to discuss. Welcome back to the show, Sabrina.
Good morning. Thanks so much for having me on.
So what do you make of this kind of clear contrast between the New York Times' framing of HBU students in particular not having protests, not being as agitated around the Biden administration's handling of the war in Gaza as predominantly white institutions, and what we're clearly seeing in this video where there's enough discord and pushback at Morehouse to require the White House to send an emissary to talk to the students in advance of Biden showing up to do this commencement address?
Well, I think mainstream media has painted this narrative that most of the protesters are just a bunch of rich white kids. That's actually not true. There have been protests at Morehouse that I've covered on the show as well. It's just that mainstream media is choosing not to focus on them, because if they do focus on those protests, then it will actually show people that African Americans have an issue with this as well. And it also reflects on Joe Biden's.
No, African Americans, black people don't have a problem with, with what is going on in the Middle East. It's been going on forever. It seems like they consistently want to draw black Americans and our young people into this liberal protesting of Middle Eastern conflict so that they could put a black face on their discontent as Israel battles Palestine. Of course, they should not be all in an uproar about what's going on in the Middle East when they look at what's going on in their own communities, when they look at inflation, when they look at the cost of food, when they look at the cost of homelessness, when they look at the violence that's going on every day in their own communities. Why would you even want these young black Americans to be the face of protesting what's going on in the Middle East? What's so important about bringing black Americans into this conflict? It's almost like how the Democrats, they don't never say we got to get the Latino voters out, or we need the Latino women. Why are they so concentrated on black people, black Americans, when they do the least for us in our communities? This is all game. This is clickbait. This is not reality for the average young black male in this community that can't find a job, that can't afford a house, that can't afford to work one job. They need to stop it. They need to knock it off. I believe they all are paid agents on both sides of the aisle.
Polling right now with the African American community. So they don't want that narrative to get out. But yeah, there is a misconception that all the protesters are just rich white kids. But that is actually not the case. In reference to Morehouse in particular, yes, they did have a meeting with President Thomas, and they did express their opinion about Gaza and the decision of the school to actually have Joe Biden speak at commencement, which they seem to be very much against. It's really interesting to me that Joe Biden feels comfortable coming to an HBCU after he reneged on his promise to actually remove student loan debt for HBCU students, for those that earn under $125,000 a year. In particular, Morehouse is in Georgia. So Joe Biden is going back to Georgia, where he promised to give people $2,000 checks if they supported Warnock and Ossoff. So it's really interesting that he's actually willing to take that risk. I think the right thing for the students to do is to protest during the commencement. Now, President Thomas has already announced that if there are going to be protests, that he will cancel.
If they protest, it shouldn't be on the behest or behalf of what's going on in the Middle East. It should be on the behalf that he referred to them as super predators that must be brought to heel. That he created a 94 crime bill that incarcerated their uncles, grandfathers, and some of their older brothers. It should be the fact that he has no respect for them. He said, if you don't vote for him, you ain't black. It should be for the fact that he was a devout segregationist and said that if they went to school with white kids, they would turn the schools into a racial jungle. It should be based on his character. He should not be speaking at a historically black college. If that ain't some slave mentality thinking, I don't know what it is. If that's not some mind manipulation, that they really are not upset about that, but they're upset about some conflict that's going on thousands of miles away that does not have anything to do with them when they have their own problems. But you get these pundits, they want, for some reason, black Americans to be involved in this conflict. I think it has a sinister connotation to it, I think they want to put a black face on civil unrest. I think that them comparing these protests to the civil rights movements with Malcolm X and Martin Luther King is disingenuous. And I hope people see through this. If they're going to protest Joe Biden, let them protest against Joe Biden for what he has done to them, how he has treated them, how he has betrayed their trust.
Now, why is that? People have to understand that the presidents of these universities respond to the board of trustees. So President Thomas is doing exactly what the board of trustees wants him to do. So this is why I continue to say these universities, we have to start calling them businesses. And they have realized that the students are the customers. So the students actually have more power here than they may have realized, but I think they're realizing it now. But I think it is absolutely important that Morehouse students do express their opinion about Joe Biden speaking at commencement. And I think this needs to happen to Joe Biden's face.
Sure. The reason he's speaking there, as you alluded to, is the fact that Georgia is a swing state that he hopes to win, and his approval numbers with black community right now are very, very bad, historically low for Democrats. What does he need to say to a gathering such as this if he wants to improve his standing with a core key constituency?
Well, I can tell you what he doesn't need to say. He doesn't need to say that we have to protect our democracy. He doesn't need to say that if it's me or it's Donald Trump, you're going to end up with Donald Trump again. I don't think the Trump fear-mongering is working with people this time around. And I think Joe Biden needs to focus more on his actions instead of his rhetoric. The president has a tremendous amount of power when it comes to this conflict in Gaza. He can call for an immediate ceasefire tomorrow if he wanted.
See, this is what I'm talking about. This is a so-called black woman, liberal, and her whole thing that these black students should be advocating for and trying to get some political currency is for a whole nother people. Do you guys see a problem with this? To where she wants them to advocate for others in another conflict versus advocating for their own communities and themselves. This is a betrayal all in itself. And I don't know what it's driven by. You know what I mean? Because they come off so sincere. But what about all the violence in this country? In Detroit, in New York, in Chicago, in Houston, in DC, in Jersey, going on in the black community. The cost of food. She doesn't think that they should advocate for anything for themselves if they're going to allow Joe Biden to talk at historically black college. See, all of this shows you that there's really a disconnect and no leadership in the black community.
And that would actually hold a lot of weight and would speak volumes. So the students, I have to say, this younger generation, they're not so much focused on the rhetoric. They're focused on the actions and the behavior. And they've done a lot of research in reference to the Palestinian struggle, in reference to how Israel was created as a state to begin.
What about the black American struggle and how the term African American was even created? What about that struggle? What about the struggle for equality in their own country? I'm not seeing how that's not even mentioned. Where you want to put black faces on the front line for a Middle Eastern conflict, when the relationship between Arabs and the black community is hostile at best, and Palestinians are not some different breed of Middle Eastern, they are Arabs. And they are just as racist and prejudiced and biased toward black Americans as anyone else in this world. Facts.
And with. So they are very much aware of what is happening there to the people. So Joe Biden can say as much rhetoric as he wants to, but until he actually takes some action and implements a ceasefire, I think the students are not going to buy into that rhetoric.
Yeah, I think the point that you made about the promises that he has reneged upon, specifically for residents of Georgia and Atlanta, is a really important point. Many folks will want to push under the rug the fact that he made a different, bigger promise, frankly, to graduates of HBCUs than his broader kind of student debt mandate, which was he was going to cancel all student debt for HBCU graduates, not just the 10 to 20,000, depending on whether or not you were a Pell Grant recipient. And I do think that given the enormity of that promise, many more Black students are going to have not forgotten it or be less willing to forgive him retracting that promise, not acting upon that promise, than as compared to the broader community. What's interesting, though, to me is what this clear gap. You're hearing, this is from the AP that spoke to some students. One student at Morehouse, a sophomore named Anwar Kareem, said, "This is a global catastrophe in Gaza, and Joe Biden coming to pander for our votes is political blackface." You're getting that kind of rhetoric, that kind of protest coming out of the voices of Black college students at the same time that you have the New York Times insisting that Black students, unlike their peers at white institutions, are too concerned with their own kind of domestic concerns, socioeconomic concerns, and that they are just not paying as much attention to what's going on in Gaza, when it does really feel like the opposite, frankly, is true, that Black students have been overrepresented, if anything, on campuses, at these campus protests. There was a really viral image of a Black student who was an HBCU student at Emory getting tased by the police some months ago. And I got to ask you, Savvy,
I seen that. And he was only one of few. He was like the Crispus Attucks at Emory, the only Black person in camera range. So they took that one image to make it like the Black community has signed on to have a voice of protest against what's going on in the Middle East. And I just want to know, why is it so important to involve the Black community? I mean, have you noticed they're not going and saying, why aren't Latinos upset about Gaza? Why aren't Mexican Americans upset about Gaza? Why aren't the Koreans in America upset about Gaza? They have a fixation on pulling the Black community, which is the community in the most dire straits, into a conflict that their protest is not going to have anything to do with solving it. Biden is going to do exactly what Netanyahu wants. Bibi Netanyahu is going to do what he wants. And no amount of protesting on a college campus is going to change his mind. So, what is the real reason you want Black Americans face on this? I think it's a manipulation.
Trying to Bernie bro the pro Gaza protests?
Right. They're trying to make it seem like younger, Black students are not paying attention to this issue. That is not the case. Every pro-Palestinian protest that I have.
Do you see this? What about like I just said, what about the Latino students, the Latino community, the Mexican community, the Koreans, the Native Americans, the Indian Americans, Kamala people? Why are y'all fixated on putting the Black community into this conflict? It seems a bit much that you're so concerned. And it seems a bit much that they're not protesting Joe Biden for how Joe Biden has referred to them the things he's done to the Black community in their lifetime.
Covered on the ground. There have been Black students there as well. They don't want you to see that. They want you to think that this is just a rich white kid thing that's happening here, but that's not the case. It's similar to the situation where they didn't want people to realize for a long time that a lot of the pro-Palestinian protesters were also kids that were Jewish, right? They want to hide that narrative. They want people to think that everyone is not waking up and is not aware. And I have to let people understand that younger generation, particularly younger Black voters, are less likely to buy into supporting the Democratic Party. They're more willing to support third party or independent candidates. They're less likely to be pro-establishment. They are less likely to buy into the narrative of mainstream media. They're more willing to do their own research and not just take the information that's put out in front of them by outlets like the New York Times. This is a different generation, and this is a new time, and I look forward to it. So I have a lot of hope for the future because of this generation.
Is there any speculation about what will happen when Biden is speaking there? Are there going to be protests or walkouts occurring?
I haven't heard anything yet, but it could be one of those things that they actually keep on the down low and they keep between themselves and just decide to do it at the spur of the moment. Because again, President Thomas did say that if there were protests that he would cancel commencement. So if the students are clever, which I believe they are, they're probably going to keep this among themselves, and then it'll just be something that happens at commencement.
So if you were Joe Biden, if in some topsy-turvy world you worked for Joe Biden, would you advise him to do this speech?
Well, number one, I would never work for Joe Biden, but if I was in that situation and I had his ear, I would tell him that number one, you need to call for a ceasefire. Number two, you need to stop funding Israel, stop funding Ukraine. And number three, like, you do not need to appear at Morehouse, considering what you have not done for that particular community in reference to the promises that you made to them. That's what I would tell Joe Biden, and then I would resign.
All right, Savvy Sabs, thank you so much for joining us again today.
That was propaganda and rhetoric from these two sisters. You know what I mean? Because read between the lines, and I know I repeated it so many times that what they're doing by keep trying to act as if this is something that Black Americans in the Black American community should take as their cause celeb. When, as we all know, they've been fighting over there in the Middle East for over 100 years. So what is it so imperative now that the Black community becomes the face of it, the face of these protests alongside these Arabs and foreigners and Somalians? I think it's sinister, and I think it's some type of duplicitous theme. Mark Lamont Hill, he's pushing it, but he has college age children. Why don't he put his college age children out front at these campuses, since he's so adamant about them getting support? Well, this is Friday evening. Signing to you out of Detroit. It's Detroit HP TV. Y'all keep y'all head on a swivel. Think about what I've said and think about the narrative and the picture they're trying to paint. Keep y'all head on swivels, and also salute to all patriots. Like, share, and subscribe. Peace.